Really excited to have Miss Halle Berger with us tonight. Halle is a very involved volunteer with our organization, Future Frogmen. She's injected a lot of energy and has been a lot of fun to work with. So it's really an honor to have her with us tonight to talk about Dungeness crabs, which is her specialty, and predicting vulnerability to climate change, the crab's vulnerability to climate change. So, Halle, I know you have your undergrad in marine biology from Northeastern University, and you're in your second year of your master's studies at UConn at the Avery Point campus. But can you tell us more about your background and where you're from and so forth?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that introduction. I'm from Southeast Massachusetts, and so I grew up right along the water, and I was really interested in, the ocean, and I started attending a summer camp in 5th grade that was getting your hands wet in the water and learning about the animals and everything. So that's what really started me out on this path of marine science. From there, I took some classes in high school about biology and marine biology, and I did an internship with a local nonprofit called the Buzzards Bay Coalition, and they work in New Bedford, Massachusetts to protect the local watershed. And through those activities, I knew from there I wanted to go on to college to study marine biology, which is how I got involved with Northeastern University. And it was there that I started exploring research through a few different opportunities that I had. One was what's called a research experience for undergraduates, where you go to a different school for a summer and you do an independent research project. And there I was actually studying a different crab species and became really excited about research and knew that after getting my undergraduate, I wanted to go on to get a master's, which is how I came to the University of Connecticut.
And you're at the Avery Point campus of UConn, right?
Yeah, so we're right in Groton, Connecticut, right on the waterfront.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that school is focused exclusively on marine science?
We have a few other programs, but we have a pretty large marine sciences department here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I find it really interesting that as the little bit I know about Dungeness crabs, they're from the Pacific Northwest area, and you're here on the East Coast. So how did you get involved and interested in Dungeness crabs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of my advisors, her name is Samantha Sidlecki. She is a biogeochemical modeler, and she was working out at the University of Washington prior to coming to UConn. So all of her work prior to coming here was focused on the West Coast. And for that reason, I'm using her model for the West Coast to study the vulnerability of Dungeness crabs to climate change. And that's kind of why I'm focused on a West Coast species, even though I'm on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I look forward to hearing more about the model when we get to your work later in the conversation. Now, again, us East Coasters probably don't know a whole lot about the Dungeness crab. Can you familiarize us with this crab?
Yeah, so they're a pretty important species on the West Coast. They range all the way from Alaska to Southern California. And they have a really great economic value because they comprise a fishery. And they're also culturally important because there are some tribal communities along the West Coast that fish them as well. And they also have ecological importance because they make up a major part of the food web there. So something most people might not know is that they have a very complex life cycle, which I can actually share my screen here and show you what that looks like. So the Dungeness crab life cycle is unique because it has life stages that occupy different regions of the water column. It starts off with the adult females and males, which live along the bottom, mating. And the females produce about 2 million eggs, which are carried under her abdomen between the months of October and December. And the eggs hatch between January and March, and they hatch into these larval stages, which are called zoea and megalope. And the zoea are able to disperse offshore, actually pretty far from the shore, and undergo a few molts in the water column before becoming megalopa, which is this last stage here. And the megalopa are able to swim back onto the shore where they settle, and in the nearshore environment between April and August, and this is when they molt into the juvenile stage. And the juveniles hang out for about 2 years before molting into sexually mature adults, and the cycle can start again. So the females are left alone by the fishery, and they have a lifespan of 8 to 10 years, whereas the males reach large enough size to be fished at about 4 years of age. And they actually comprise the most valuable single species fishery for the West Coast. And the fishery is managed based on season as well. So they do not fish when the crabs are molting or mating. Yeah. And like I said, the tribes are also managing the fisheries, and they actually get the first pick. So their fishery opens before Oregon, Washington, and California's does.
Okay, so there are some state or federal regulations as well, but or do the tribes control the regulations?
So it's managed by the states, but the tribes do have a say in that management as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they have, they're given an advantage to fish earlier than other people.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned the economic value. It's not like you're harvesting a claw, like on a stone crab or something. You harvest the entire crab, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Only the males.
Only the males, right? Yeah. And did you say that it's the largest economic value of fish harvested on the West Coast?
Yes, yeah. In most years, it is the most valuable single species fishery for the West Coast.
Wow.
Yes.
It's amazing. Okay. Now let's, anything else we should know about the Dungeness crabs before we move on?
So I guess one last thing is that the fishery right now is pretty sustainably managed. So a lot of people aren't too concerned about the fishery, but I am, because there are these climate change impacts happening at an alarming rate on the West Coast, and they could affect the fishery in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Such as, I think you had mentioned in your studies, aside from the modeling, you're looking at the impact of what, ocean acidification and hypoxia?
Yeah, as well as warming. So the anthropogenic emission of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is causing global warming, and it's also causing ocean acidification, which I have another slide I can share to show what this is for people who don't know. Let's see. So every year the ocean absorbs about a quarter of the human emitted carbon dioxide, and this is causing ocean acidification because carbon dioxide has this reaction with water that creates carbonic acid and releases hydrogen ions, and that causes a decrease in the ocean pH. And this is happening at a global scale, but we see amplification specifically along the West Coast. And that's because this is an upwelling region. So for those of you who don't know what upwelling is, when the wind is coming from the north on the West Coast, it causes water at the surface to be pulled offshore, and then water comes from below to replace it. And this water that's coming from the deep already has a signature of low oxygen and high carbon dioxide, as well as high nutrients. So when it reaches the surface, it stimulates algae blooms, and then these algae blooms sink and die off. And once they're being decomposed by bacteria at the bottom of the ocean, this is consuming more oxygen and also releasing more carbon dioxide. So you have this amplification of the global trends of ocean acidification, as well as what we call hypoxia, which just means low oxygen conditions. And these effects are also being compounded by global warming.
Okay, that's really interesting and disturbing as well.
Great, so this is a video created by the Oregon Fish and Wildlife, and they happened to have a camera that was positioned overlooking a crab trap. And it just happened to be out when there was a hypoxia event. So you can see right now the crabs are happy and the water is clear. But soon hypoxia conditions set in, and you can start to see the effects in the crabs because they're becoming more lethargic, and you can also see the water quality is very diminished. And this is all occurring over the span of just a couple weeks. So it's pretty alarming and obviously an issue when fishermen are pulling up these traps and all the crabs in them are dead. This is kind of a video transect showing you all the dead crabs and fish along the bottom here. So with climate change, we expect these hypoxic events to happen more frequently and also be more severe, which is why it's a cause for concern for the future of the fishery.
Thanks for watching. For more information, visit our website at www.futurefrogmen.org.